Welcome Internet to Psychoanalytic Talk, and today we're going to be talking about the concept of ambivalence, which is a concept that went through a new myriad of transformations throughout its terminology, which is not unusual for psychoanalysis, but this is quite an interesting development. So the man that created the concept, or at least coined it in the world of mental health, was Eugene Bleuler. So that man is responsible for basically defining schizoid personalities, schizophrenia, and autism. So basically a very important psychiatrist. And his term ambivalence, basically for him, was one of the major symptoms of schizophrenia. What he meant by that was that for the schizophrenic, love and hate are there at the same time. They're confused with each other. For example, a schizophrenic might, for example, insult a person with sweet tone of voice, or quite the opposite, might yell their love at them, and so on and so forth. Like, you have myriads of examples. But for him, it was one of the defining criteria of schizophrenia, which is very interesting because the concept is going to evolve afterwards with Freud. Because for Freud, ambivalence was basically the conjunction of two opposites coming into one. It's only later that it had become basically a defense mechanism and even a reactional formation, i.e. the people become ambivalent because basically they can't express their hate. So therefore it kind of merges with love and it becomes ambivalent, right? So for Freud, what's very interesting is that for him, it was always a set of opposites. And it was something that was seen as relatively pathological, but also normal. And that's also what Bleuler felt, that there was a pathological side in schizophrenia, but there was also a more normal side. So for Freud, it's very interesting because we can see that for Bleuler, it was more about schizophrenia. For Freud, it's going to become much more about neurosis and about how, for example, an obsessive individual can be conflicted between loving another person and also having resentment. For example, being passive-aggressive could be seen as being ambivalent, that you're not outright aggressive, but you're not doing things properly, or you're being a bit of a saboteur, right? Because there's something resentful inside of you. So you're not quite frankly aggressive because you don't want to destroy the object, but you also don't want to show the object that you like them. So it's kind of a way for the mind to be able to express something while showing something else, right? And it's only with Kleinian theory that it's really going to go further beyond this. So for Klein, because for Klein, ambivalence is the result of the mergence of the split. So very quickly, the split is basically a fundamental, unquestionable divide between two opposites. Typically love and hate, good and bad. And basically for Klein, in splitting, and I made a video on this if you're interested, but the short version is basically that split is there because the infant in very early life cannot merge both, because the bad elements, the aggressive elements, the tension-filled elements would override the good elements, because the baby does not have yet the framework, the mind, in order to make it conciliatory, meaning it's one against the other and the good is not going to triumph over the bad. Therefore, baby needs to split. Therefore, there is good baby, good mum, and bad baby, bad mum. And fundamentally, it's something you can see in children, not just babies, but very young children. For example, if the character that they see on a TV show is bad, he's only bad. There's no good. And the same goes for the good character, he's only good. So, and if you ask them, they can very hardly and very difficult, with a lot of difficulties, basically see a bit of nuance. It's very black and white. That's the whole point of splitting. Now, for ambivalence, what's very interesting is that ambivalence is the stage beyond that. the moment in which basically the child is going to be able to reunite good and bad, to make it so that both can coexist at the same time. Therefore, in that coexistence, something of destruction is lost, because basically the good and the bad can merge together, but they also can coexist, meaning that the baby can see mother for both her good sides and her bad sides, what she can bring to him and what she takes away from him. Therefore, baby sees mother as a whole, what we call whole object. And basically, ambivalence is fundamental in this process, because what's going to happen when ambivalence happens is that all the schizoparanoid fears, or paranoid schizoid, I always invert them. Paranoid schizoid phase is absolute, it's terrifying, it's destroy or be destroyed. But here, with ambivalence, it's going to enter another phase of the mind, another mechanism in which basically both are going to be true at the same time. Not succinctly, not one then the other, but together. And together in a package. That is so very fundamental, that package, because this package allows us to have a wider net of human interactions. It allows us to be able to navigate through difficult situations in which there is no right and wrong answer, situations in which interpersonally the answer necessitates a lot of thought, a lot of pull back or to withdraw a bit to be able to think. That's also part of the ambivalence. The ambivalence is also a way of not acting out, because when it's good or bad, when it's split, then acting out becomes much more probable, because you have to act out against a bad object, you have to save the good object. But when the object is both good and bad, well, then it gives you the space to really take a step back and think and be able to really take in the nuance and be able to have a conversation, not interpersonally, but from yourself to yourself, or within the frame of the ego. The ego is capable of questioning both itself and the other, because ambivalence works in both ways, right? It's both something in which it's the other person which we have ambivalence towards, but we also have ambivalence towards ourselves. And this is also very important, because ambivalence towards ourselves is very common. Like, for example, we might feel that we've mastered something, but we've spent too much time on it, and that picture of ourselves makes a vision of us that's more realistic. If I am split, for example, I'm not going to have realistic image of myself. I'm going to have a shifting ideal and catastrophic image of myself, always oscillating and never finding a stable ground. Ambivalence helps to have this stable ground, to have this basis in which fundamentally I can reflect, I can self-reflect, and I can accept the badness of my psyche, but I can also, this is important, let the good side of my psyche shine, meaning that the good part is not going to be destroyed by the bad part, meaning that I understand that both come together like light and shadow. And this is only possible because I have accepted that there is ambivalence, that ambivalence in its wider shape and wider form is this acceptation that nothing's perfect, that everything is flawed, but it doesn't make it bad, corrupt, evil, quite the opposite. It's fundamentally, in my eyes, in my conceptions, how I believe ambivalence to be is this very simple sentence of man isn't perfect, or mistakes are mankind's default. In a way, it allows the ideal to come down, because there is this understanding that mistakes will be made, and that ambivalence allows us to open towards that framework and towards that perspective. And in, for example, in neurotic levels of organizations, this ambivalence can lead to issues. I'm not saying it's perfect, but that allows the neurotic individual to be able to still integrate both good and bad, and not split and have a discontinuous sense of relationships, but also of themselves. Meaning that everything with ambivalence is continuous. Everything is in the gray zone. But this is important because it is the gray zone is the more realistic zone rather than good or bad, right? Even though there can be good sins and bad sins, it's a conjecture of both and basically the merging of both that gives us the whole picture of both ourselves and relationships. Well, that's pretty much it for the concept. I hope you liked this video. As always, if there's any comments, feel free to drop them by. If you have any questions, anything you'd like to ask. Also, if you want to add something, because I'm sure there's other ways of talking about ambivalence, feel free to do so. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.